You're listening to the Joe Camo Show. Real sports, real talk.
Welcome to the show, guys. Joseph Robert Camo, the fantasy football counselor. Got an exciting show today. We're talking about NFL fixes. Is the game rigged? We're talking about sports fixing. And I've got an amazing guest on the show today, Brian Tuohy. Before we get into this, guys, manscaped.com. Brian, I gotta promote this even before I promote you right now for a sec. Manscaped.com. Use promo code ShowerLion. Save yourself 20% on some amazing trimmers. I've been using the shower gel. Amazing, guys. Again, promo code ShowerLion. Save yourself 20%. Brian, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And I had to get you on the show because this is something that I think with, having a big sports fan base for my following, especially Instagram, a lot of people are curious about this. This comes up a lot when shows are, games are kind of close and, something goes wrong. Like, that game was fixed. That game was rigged. And I remember looking back years ago with you, and I remember seeing this book out. And again, this is something that my dad, prior to his passing, would always say, this is a fixed game. This is a fixed game, he used to say. Like, he knew it. But we're going to get down to the facts about your book, about what you do. Welcome to the show.
No problem. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, my book was The Fix is In.
Yeah.
And I've written a few after that, like The Fix is Still In, the sequel to it. And yeah, that's what I talk about, is the potential that games are manipulated by the leagues itself to make them more interesting and basically make more money for those involved.
And you've made a living doing this, and what sparked this?
Living, that's a strong word. Let's not go to living. I've made a little money. I've sold a few books. Living though is not a living.
I think it's the most well-known book around this, is it not? Like, if you compare, I don't know the competitors, I don't know the market,
well, nobody does what I do because there's no money in it, but also because if you write like a conspiracy slanted article, even if you wrote something about like Michael Jordan, didn't really retire, he was suspended for gambling, nobody's going to publish it. And that's what you run into, is you can't get it. If you can't get it on ESPN, if you can't get it at Sports Illustrated, if you can't get your article published at the mainstream outlets, well, nobody knows it exists.
Well, I'm building a platform in the next couple of years. It's going to be bigger than some of the guys you just mentioned. Like I said, Joe Rogan for sports. So we're going to have you back on again. This is kind of like our pre-interview just to kind of get things going. So again, what sparked the idea? Did you lose a bad bet? Was it like one day you're like, oh man, I knew that I should have went that way. I need to dive into this. What type of research went into it? Like, how did you even get into this? What sparked the flame here? Like, the idea?
Well, like you say, the fix is in is always the cry of the loser, right? I should have won my bet, but I didn't because it was fixed.
Yeah.
But I really got into it because there was two books I read. One called Interference by a guy named Nhl, who wrote about game fixing from a gambling perspective and organized crime influencing the NFL. And this other book They Call It a Game, which was written by a former player named Bernie Parrish. And Bernie basically wrote in his book, or at least he alluded to the fact that he thought when CBS and the other major networks bought into the NFL, that they literally bought the league and that they took over and controlled it more than the NFL itself did.
Right.
And so I kind of put those two together and started doing my own research into the subject. And the more I dug and the more I looked at it, the more I was like, the main takeaway is the fact that it's perfectly legal for the NFL to fix its own games, which many people wouldn't believe, but it's true. Wow. There's no law that prevents the league from manipulating their own games. And Tim Donaghy, when he got busted by the NBA, or not by the NBA, but really FBI, that's what he said, is he said the NBA would tell the referees, look, this is how we want you to officiate the games. This is what we want you to focus on. This is what we want you to ignore. And he said that the referees instantly knew, well, basically you wanted to favor team A over team B. And then that's what the referees would do. And eventually team A would win because all the calls were going to go their way, because that's what the NBA dictated. That's what they wanted their employees to do. And that's why it's not illegal, especially through officiating. If the NFL tells its referees, look, we want you to not call holding when Patrick Mahomes is playing or when Aaron Rodgers is playing, well, you're going to give him more protection, and then he's going to succeed more, and that's going to probably lead to that team winning. It's just that simple.
Is this because it's a private companies, theoretically? Is that why they can do this?
No, it's actually the law. There's two laws that exist. One is basically called the quiz show law, and that came out of the 1950s quiz show scandals, and it says you cannot basically influence the outcome of an intellectual contest, right, which means you couldn't fix Jeopardy, you couldn't fix even like Wheel of Fortune. But you could fix The Bachelor. You could fix Survivor because they're not intellectual contests. And the same goes for sports. It's not an intellectual contest. And then the other law is that was basically brought about by game fixing in sports is called the Sports Bribery Act. But that, and it's really simple. It basically says it's illegal to bribe a coach, a player, or a referee to influence the outcome of a game. But bribery has to be involved. If you don't bribe somebody, if LeBron James decides for himself, well, I'm going to shave points tonight and do it on his own, he's not breaking the law. So there's no law that exists that protects from this happening.
So I would think the advantages of fixing a game, I'm just thinking here, there's a couple that come to my mind, but I would think the main advantage is for a popularity contest. My uncle, before he passed away, would always say, particularly for the NHL and hockey, he's like, why is it that there really isn't two Canadian hockey teams ending up in the championships? It's always kind of like you got to get that US market, and you wouldn't see a Stanley Cup with two Canadian teams. So is the main reason for fixing kind of just more because of the popularity contest? We got to make sure that Pat Mahomes is a popular player and his team makes it up, or Tom Brady. I'll give you a perfect example, and I kind of call this, I'm not an expert, is the Brady, it was Peyton Manning versus, who was it? The Ravens, was it? That year, no, Ray Lewis won it, his last one, which I think was fixed. And then also, what was it? Cam Newton got smoked by Peyton Manning, who was throwing beach balls that game. I'm like, dude, and I called them, like, Peyton Manning's going to get his last Super Bowl, then he's going to retire because he's kind of at the end of his rope here. So is it a popularity thing, like just to get more ratings? Why fix anything?
Yeah, I think for the NFL, it is about ratings, because what it comes down to is, the vast majority of the money the NFL makes is from television contracts. And if you're going to get all this money from the television networks, well, you have to appease them in some way. You have to deliver ratings. You have to deliver numbers. And to do that, you have to make the game as interesting as possible to the fans. So I don't think it's scripted. I mean, I don't think the NFL's, at the beginning of the season is like, okay, we're going to lay it out this way. This is how the season's going to go. And then these are going to be our two Super Bowl teams. What I think happens is fans latch on to certain players, and then certain storylines naturally develop. And then the league says, look, we're going to push these. We're going to make sure that these storylines go on perhaps longer than they should.
Harbaugh
because that's what the people want to see. Yeah.
And
like you say, and like the Peyton Manning one, exactly. He goes out on top. It's a great celebration of Super Bowl 50. He's one of the best players of all time, blah, blah, blah. And even last year, ratings were down for the NFL across the board, except when Tom Brady played. And who winds up in the Super Bowl but Tom Brady? Go figure. Yeah. And that's what I think it boils down to, is because you have to remember, despite I don't think that it's professional wrestling and the NFL, there's no actually legal difference between them. They're both sports entertainment. And even the NFL has argued before the Supreme Court, we're an entertainment company. We're not 32 individual teams. We're one entity known as the NFL. And so because of that, they can basically script it or manipulate it or whatever you want to call it to get the outcomes they want, because they have to draw eyes to television, and that's where they make their money.
But somebody would debate that, and I've talked to friends about this, and they're like, well, Joe, any story could be good. For example, Jacksonville Jaguars right now, like the last team, they kind of suck. But what a great story. Rookie comes in, Trevor Lawrence, first overall pick, comes in and wins it, right? Like anything can be manipulated to be a story, because then you can pull the underdog. So they kind of debunked my whole theory of the Harbaugh Bowl and the Peyton Manning and all that, the Ray Lewis getting his last, and it's like, because anything can be a story. Is that kind of true? I mean, anything can be a story, but it almost seems kind of too obvious with the Peyton Manning and Ray Lewis to use that as an example, right?
Well, some are, like you say, you can, the media can make anything a story. I mean, we've seen that. That's true. I don't, discount that. But I think if you would go back throughout history, especially maybe the last 20 years for the Super Bowl, and you would take the two teams that lost the NFC and AFC championship games and made that a Super Bowl as opposed to the Super Bowl we got, I think you would be hard pressed to make as many storylines and as many interesting outcomes as you did with the Super Bowls we wound up with. If Peyton Manning didn't make the Super Bowl that last year, I forget who they beat in the championship game, but it wouldn't have been the same compelling story. Sure, you could have made a story. It wouldn't be necessarily as compelling.
He took down a superpower. Peyton Manning that year, Cam Newton was on fire. Like he was a Superman, literally. And he beat him. He beat a juggernaut. He beat the alpha. He beat the, and that was a great story to end it, right? And he looked like crap that game. Peyton Manning didn't look good in that Super Bowl.
No. Well, and he was, he hadn't been right since he hurt his neck and was supposedly on HGH that was delivered to his wife, but not to him. But certain guys seem to like they get the protection. And I mean, I know, again, for the debunkers out there, you could say, okay, well, Aaron Rodgers is a great quarterback. And so he's going to win more games regardless.
Yeah.
But if you get that little bit of edge from the referees, you get that little bit of help, you get that little bit of push, and you have them ignoring perhaps holding on your offensive line, or, you get the benefit of the doubt on a pass interference call. Well, 2 or 3 penalties like that can alter the outcome of a game. And it's something we've all seen. And I mean, we've even seen how badly the referees can screw up, but yet, despite the fact that they can screw up horribly, I mean, like they did in that championship game between the Rams and Saints with the pass interference call that's lived on and, legend, none of the NFL officials get punished for it.
No, there's no repercussions.
Suspended, fined. Yeah, there's no repercussions. So my argument is if there's no repercussions, then they're not doing their job incorrectly. They're doing the job that they've been told to do.
And it's ego as well. I just watched a basketball game. It was on yesterday. I think Anthony Davis, the Lakers, he put his shoe on or something like that. Like he was on the side. I didn't watch. I just saw a highlight him putting the shoe on, and then he just got ejected from the game for taking too long to put his shoe on. And then that's a referee ego thing. I mean, that sways the whole. You take out one of their best players, now the other team's going to win, right? Like,
yeah. Well, and that's just it. And I mean, again, Tim Donaghy, which a lot of people discount because he's a criminal, convicted criminal. But he was one of the top NBA referees in the league, and the NBA wouldn't deny it up until the point where the FBI dragged him out. But I mean, he said, there was definitely, conflicts of personalities that would go on the court. And then there was other referees who would suck up to certain athletes out there.
Right.
So that influences games too. And I mean, they may not necessarily be a fix in the way we're talking about, but again, those little influences alter games. They alter outcomes.
You know what I like about football? And again, first of all, is there I guess there's a lot of mathematical, there's probably so many ways that you can fix it. For example, right? Sure. The running back runs and then they spot the ball. That referee can take it, put it a little bit this way, put a little bit that way. That could sway the game it's a game of inches, right? So have you done any mathematical calculation on how many variable ways you can really fix a game? It's limitless, right? There's so many ways.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I never even thought about that. But I mean, they've done mathematics on potentially point shaving in college basketball.
Yeah.
But for football, I've never seen that sort of thing, and I've never done it. It's too much math for me to deal with.
Yeah.
I can't go that far. That's just too much. But you're right. I mean, there's several, and the thing is, like I say, for the people, if you get this seed planted in your mind that there's a potentiality that the NFL could manipulate games just through referees. Don't even talk about players fixing games or coaches being involved, but just through the officiating. I think everybody who's watched enough NFL has seen things that make you question what's happened.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, if you're watching an HD TV at home and you can see a guy's clearly in bounds and they go to the official review and then they come out and say, no, he was out of bounds, you just saw something went wrong. And every week it seems like, especially lately, every week there's some sort of weird penalty, like a, hit on the quarterback that's deemed, illegal contact and all sorts of things. And, nothing happens. But it alters games. It changes the outcome, and it changes who wins, who loses.
My friends think I'm crazy, but imagine this. Here's my theory on the whole. Let's go back to Cam Newton, Peyton Manning. Here's what I picture, okay? Cam Newton's a young guy, having this amazing season, and then Peyton Manning's at the end of his rope, and he's about to retire. Here's my vision. I vision the NFL pulling in Cam Newton, saying, hey, Cam, how are you today? You had a great season. Keep your mouth shut. Here's a contract. And we're going to get you a piece of paper here. You're going to lose this game. Because if you saw the one play in the game where he was going to jump on a fumbled ball and he kind of backed away.
Yeah.
I almost think that these guys have sold their soul theoretically. They're signed on to something, say, hey, Cam, here's $500 million or whatever it is. Let's say it's $20 million. You are set for the rest of your life. Your family is going to be protected. You're set. ABC. You just got to lose a Super Bowl. We're going to give you a Super Bowl down the road. We're going to give you that opportunity, but you have to throw this game. I think this is happening, and I don't think the players will admit it. But do you think this is possible? I think that it has to be, because we see the physiology in these guys, and maybe they're having a bad game. Aaron Rodgers, for example, right? This one year I did a point spread. I was a 9-game parlay, and this is like 4 or 5 years ago. All I needed was Aaron Rodgers to win this game. I could swear to God, he was not trying. I'm telling you, he was like, he wasn't trying. Look, he woke up in the morning. I'm like, dude, we just need you to cover the spread. And he wasn't trying. He was running the ball on like 3rd and long. I'm like, dude, you need to come back and win the game. Why are you throwing behind the line of scrimmage? Why? And you get frustrated with this stuff. So my question is, this whole thing, do you think players could be in on this?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I don't discount that at all. I mean, I know, and the NFL will deny it, I know games have been fixed for gamblers, and that's involving players shaving points or outright throwing matches. I know that's happened. The FBI's investigated. I have many files. I wrote a book based on FBI files I dug up, but the NFL claims it's never happened in their 100-year history.
Yeah.
I don't believe that, but that's what they claim because no one's ever been convicted of that crime. So they can say that, but it's not true. But I don't think they would ever write it down like with the NFL, like you're saying, like here's a contract, you have to sign it. You can't have a paper trail. And that's why, a lot of people say, well, if this is happening, how come nobody's talking about it? Well, because there's no proof. Even if Peyton Manning were to come out and say, yeah, you know what, I threw that Super Bowl against the Saints when they won it after Hurricane Katrina, I threw that, and then the NFL rewarded me by giving me Super Bowl 50 as a thank you, basically. And people would be like, wow, Peyton Manning said that. Well, Peyton proved that.
Yeah.
And how's Peyton going to prove it?
He can't.
He's not going to have anything written down. He's going to say, well, I played bad in this game and I played, great or whatever in that game against Cam Newton or whatever.
He's got to keep his mouth shut or tarnish his reputation.
And so exactly. So now his whole reputation as an NFL player, even if it's some lowly guy who was, just a third string wide receiver or whatever, a lot of these guys, they built everything up. They're an NFL player. That's part of their identity. And they're going to have to destroy that. They're going to have proof of what they're claiming to. And then they're going to have to hope that ESPN, Sports Illustrated, and us actually listen to them, believe them, and even publish their story.
Yeah.
So, there's nothing to really gain. You can't really write a tell-all book because maybe nobody's going to buy it because you don't have the proof. So, there's not millions of dollars in coming out and exposing this as happening. There's nothing to really gain. There's a lot to lose, but there's very little to gain besides maybe a peace of mind for some of these athletes who may be involved. But I think that occurs. I think there is some quid pro quo that goes on that says, look, you do X for us, we'll do Y for you. And that could even be just simply like, look, we know you tested positive for HGH or cocaine or whatever because we run the drug testing program. What do you want to do? Do you want us to suspend you and out you as basically a drug cheat or substance abuser? Or do you want to fix game X for us?
Yeah.
What do you say? Which would you rather do as a player? Which are you willing to do?
Yeah, I think players are definitely involved. And again, sticking on the player thing, let's use Odell Beckham Jr., for example. The guy sucks. He's not a good player. I don't care what anyone says. He's a trash player. He's slightly above par, if best, wide receiver.
He had one good catch, though.
One good catch, and he hasn't literally. I looked at his average. He's averaged 3 touchdowns per season. He's only finished 2 full seasons his entire career. They pump him and pump him and pump him. He's a marketable guy. They pump him and pump him. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. Yesterday there was a game. He's on the Rams. Deebo Samuel, who I had on my show, better player. No talk about him in the media, just about Odell being on the Rams. He had like 2 catches the whole game. And I know he didn't get a lot of playtime. He's got to learn the playbook, yada, yada. But he's not good. Yet the NFL keeps pumping this guy. They love him. They're on his junk. Why is that? Is it just because he's a marketable guy? I think it's because he was built up and it's like they're saving face or something. Like, it's almost kind of like, it's weird, man. Like, let this guy go. It's a market. I don't get it.
Yeah, well, they do that. I think Matt Stafford's another guy. They could care less about Matt Stafford, the media in the NFL, when he was on the Lions. But suddenly now he's on the Rams.
Bigger market.
He's the savior of the Rams, right?
Yeah.
They're like, oh my God, this guy's been an incredible quarterback for 15 years. Nobody cared about him. Nobody ever said he was an incredible quarterback. He was a Lions quarterback. He was good, but he wasn't incredible. But then all of a sudden this season, they started hyping him up like he's the second coming, which makes me think that the Rams are going to go somewhere this season in the playoffs, regardless of what they've done the past couple of games.
Yeah.
Because, like you say, now they got Beckham there. They got Von Miller, who's really at the end of his career. He hasn't done too much for the Broncos since he won the Super Bowl with Peyton Manning. So, it's like they've built this super team that's in this super stadium where the owner spent $5 billion to build it. And despite the fact that he's in a lawsuit with the city of, St. Louis over relocation, it seems like they're pumping the Rams up for something this season because the Super Bowl is going to be held in LA again this year too. And so maybe they'll have back-to-back home Super Bowls. I don't know. But it just seems odd. Like you say, certain guys get pushed in ways that don't make sense sometimes.
Yeah, you bring Odell there, you got some stardom, you got some popularity. They bring in Miller now, Von Miller. It's like they're building it up. And then going on to that, sticking with that, it's like super teams like LeBron, right? Like they just won't let him be an average guy. They always got to beef him up, put him up with superstars. They won't just let him just play put him on Sacramento, for example, right? Put him on a team that's up and coming. They will never do that. And that's the thing. No. They juice up these teams. It's frustrating.
Yeah, as a fan, it should be. Because like you say, it doesn't seem natural and it doesn't seem organic. especially in the NBA, where it seems like, players are now pushing the owners around somehow to be like, hey, I'm not playing for you, but I'll go play with these other two superstar guys because we want to win a ring. And then you have Milwaukee that won the NBA championship last year. I mean, they didn't have that superstar, triumvirate. They just had the Greek Freak, and that was pretty much it. A bunch of supporting guys. But it's interesting, too, that the NBA has changed since David Stern left. Yeah. I mean, when Stern was commissioner, I think he controlled that league in many ways. And it seemed like only like 5 teams existed when Stern was commissioner. You had the Bulls because of Jordan. You had the Knicks to a certain extent. You had the Celtics. You had the 76ers. You had the Lakers. And that's why you had something like, that famous Game 6 of the 2002 conference championship between the Kings and the Lakers, which is one of the worst officiated games in league history, which anybody will admit to. It seemed like it was outright fixed to make sure the Lakers won, and ultimately won that series because the NBA wanted the Lakers in there and they didn't want the Kings. So they made it happen. And there was nothing fans could do about it. You just live with it and move on.
So do you think is Vegas in on this? Because let's talk about sports betting here, because I had what's his name, Vegas Dave, on the show. He's really accurate with this stuff. Apparently he sells his stuff. I don't know, because here's what's amazing. I've been doing betting for a long time, and I just find that, like, a majority of the time they're pretty accurate. Sometimes they're way off, right? With the spreads. Like, how do they know that that game is going to be within, X amount? And then if it's not, or, I've always felt that the call comes in, the call, Vegas makes the call. Now we got to swing this. And what's that based on? Is it because, like, so many people are winning? A majority is now bet this, so we got to swing it this way. Is there a swing going on? Is there a call coming in? And how accurate do you think? How is Vegas so accurate? How does this all? Do you know anything about this?
Well, it is kind of a mystery. I mean, I talked to a guy by the name of Scott Shetler who used to run the Stardust Sportsbook when it was the biggest sports book in Las Vegas back in the late 70s, early 80s. And I asked him point blank, because he was really open and honest with me. I said, did you guys ever have contact with the NFL? Did you guys, did they ever say, hey, look for this or don't do that? And he said, no. He said, in all the years I ran the place, all the years I worked there, he goes, we never heard from the NFL ever. It was never a connection between the two of them. Now, could times have changed? Certainly. But I don't necessarily think that the NFL is being dictated by Vegas, or Vegas is dictating the NFL. This is how we need certain games to go. But it does seem sometimes very unusual, the outcomes that you wind up with, because they are sometimes extremely accurate with the numbers that they put up. And supposedly they don't use, any computer models or anything. That's just guys who've been in the business long enough who hash these numbers out and come up with what they do.
Too close.
But it does make you question sometimes, like you say, the accuracy of it, and how, they just need like a field goal to get the over, and some team will kick a meaningless field goal and they get the over. I mean, it's really bizarre. And I can see where people put 2 and 2 together and wonder. But I mean, I've never seen the direct evidence of that. Right. I have seen a lot of things, like you say, that make me question it, but I haven't seen anything that's a direct evidence of the two being connected. But I'm sure, like you say, a lot of people would argue that they are, because it's just too coincidental to be, lucky.
Yeah, it's really frustrating. So how much research went into your book? And in conclusion, like, is, in your opinion, the NFL and all these leagues fixed? And is one more than the other? Is it more NFL? Is it more NHL? Is the fix in for sure? Is it rigged?
I think so. I think games are definitely manipulated in all the major sport leagues, be it NASCAR, the NHL, Major League Baseball. I think all of them have that manipulation. How far they're fixed, how often they're fixed, is it, up for debate? And I'm willing to debate, that it very rarely happens. I'm up to debate that it happens all the time. But I think it definitely happens because, again, it's perfectly legal for them to do so. So if it's legal for them to do it as a business decision, why wouldn't you get the best matchups you can get? Because it's going to garner the most attention, the most media attention, the most eyes to your television screen, which is going to beef up your next television contract, which is where you make all your money. And I mean, the research I did, I researched this for a long time. I even wound up on an FBI list because I filed too many Freedom of Information Act requests from them, trying to figure out which games have been fixed in the past. Because, I collected well over 400 files. Thousands upon thousands of pages from the FBI when they looked into fixed college basketball games, college football games, NFL games, NBA games, Major League Baseball games. Even though they rarely ever got a conviction, some of the evidence and some of the, admissions that they got from people being involved in organized crime in the gambling world were amazing, because they were basically saying that NFL games were certainly fixed. They said that NBA games were certainly fixed. They know that Hall of Fame players from the NBA and the NFL were betting on games in which they played back in the 60s and 70s. And then, it's in the files. It's in the books that I wrote about. It's stuff that can't really be denied.
Who said
And yet
this? Who
nobody
admitted
pays
this?
attention.
Who
The
admitted-
FBI.
Okay.
I mean, the FBI, I have a file from the FBI that basically says Bill Russell and Will Chamberlain were involved together betting on games in which they played against each other.
Wow.
Which should kick both of them out of the Hall of Fame. I mean, it's a legit FBI file. Anybody can request it. And nobody does anything about it, I was the first person to find it. I was the first person to publicize it. And nobody cared. When my book with all these FBI files came out, Larceny Games, we had contact the publisher and I from, ESPN. Sports Illustrated was supposed to run an excerpt from in their magazine. Yahoo Sports, HBO Sports. I had interviews with producers from 60 Minutes, and nobody did anything with it. Wow. Nobody covered the book. Nobody reviewed the book. Nobody said, holy cow, look at the files this guy dug up. They all just made it disappear. And if they make it disappear, well, then does anybody know it exists? Does anybody care that it exists? And that's the thing with this is, there's fixing from a gambling perspective and fixing from this, entertainment perspective. And I think both are going on and nobody's looking for it. Nobody even wants to find it. I mean, does the ESPN, if they're giving over $1 billion, they're spending over $100 billion every week on Monday Night Football, which is more than Disney spends on, movies. Why would they investigate the NFL for fixing?
Right.
You're just going to shoot yourself in the foot. Why would you give them $1.5 billion a year and then turn around and investigate them and dig all the dirt out? You can't. And so there's no investigative reporting going on in the sports world as it is, and much less is anybody going to really look for fixed games or manipulated games. Sure, they may say, oh, God, look at this horrible call in this game. But that's as far as it goes, because next week there's a whole new slew of games and nobody cares anymore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the way it operates. So, it's very easy for the media that's supposed to be investigating and be the oversight to completely ignore it because they're literally funding these leagues. And without the money that the networks are throwing at the leagues aren't going to exist. So they're all in bed together.
Yeah.
So why not be fixing games if nobody's going to look for it?
And that's a frustrating thing. I'll watch a game and it was like, oh my God, that was obviously fixed. I mean, those calls were ridiculous. And then the mainstream just wakes up the next day and like nobody really talks about it. It's like, okay, we should really address this because honestly, we should actually, in fact, go back in this game and replay the game. That's how bad this was. I mean, and there's no one talking about this. You just take the loss and you kind of even hear the announcers. I think they're kind of in on it as well. They kind of they're kind of like, yeah, that could have went that way. Oh, and then they kind of move on. If I was an announcer, I'd be like, man, let's replay this. This is wrong. That is a wrong thing that just happened. And they just kind of go with the flow. They kind of bring it up a little bit just to acknowledge it. They move on.
My favorite thing they say is, wow, they're really letting them play out there. That's my favorite. They're really letting them play, which basically is the announcers saying there's all kind of penalties going on that should be called, but you know what? For whatever reason, the referees aren't calling them. And that's a question in and of itself. I mean, if you have a rule book and the rule book says this is holding or this is defensive pass interference or whatever, and you see it time and time again happening and not being called, well, does the rule book matter? And then when it's called, when, like holding takes place 10 times and then on the 11th play, they finally call holding, well, why now? Why in this situation did you call holding? Because you could have called it here. You could have called it there. You didn't call it there. But why are you calling it now? And then you usually can see that, well, that seems to be keeping some drive alive or killing some other drive, and it's benefiting one team over the other. And it's just that right timing to call that penalty, and it sways the game.
It's subjective. They just kind of do it when they want to.
Well, it's a subjective penalty. I mean, like the famous, what was it? Not Terrell Owens. It was Des Bryant catch in the Packer game. Exactly. I mean, they could have called it a catch because of A, B, and C. Or they could have called it not a catch because of X, Y, and Z. It was depending which way they wanted to interpret the rule is what the outcome was. They decided it wasn't a catch, and, well, Packers win.
Yeah, it's total BS. And now I got to ask your opinion. How long have you been watching sports? You've been
my whole life has been involved in it. I don't watch them as much as I used to by any means because of all this. But, yeah, I've always watched sports.
I think we can all admit now that the sports are getting softer. I watched this one play with Shaquille O'Neal where he dunked. I think this is like the mid 90s or late 90s. He dunked, he came down, he kind of humped the player with his crotch and pushed them and they didn't call anything. Now it's like almost kind of like there's way more penalties. Like there's more excuses to call plays. Do you think that's even going to play a factor in this with that? Like the way that, you land on a quarterback, if you land a certain way and you don't baby the quarterback on the way down, that's a penalty, right? So it's almost like they're adding more to this.
They're adding more control. over the
Yeah.
game. They're giving officials more ability, like you say, to make these subjective calls, which can manipulate games.
Yeah.
And I think, if modern NFL fans went back and watched like a real full game from the 1970s, they would be shocked at what the players were allowed to get away with.
Yeah.
I mean,
Now
in terms of
taunting
pass,
now. Why
yeah,
can't they say what's
you
up?
can't even
What's
look at the
up?
sidelines. The guy from the Bears, he couldn't look. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the other sidelines for an extended 3 seconds, and he got flagged, and it basically altered the outcome of that game too.
Oh man, it's getting
I mean,
frustrating to watch, and I love sports. So to be honest with you, Brian, I'm honestly all in on mixed martial arts right now. I love the UFC. I love it because these guys have more balls than any other athletes on the planet. I mean, if you watch UFC, I mean,
but don't say it's not rigged.
That's another thing. Is the UFC rigged? I mean,
oh sure.
Let's talk about this real quick. I got to talk about Cowboy Cerrone. I think it was versus Connor. And then it was, who was the other guy? Justin Gaethje versus Khabib before he retired. Gaethje is a warrior. Justin Gaethje is a warrior. But when he fought Khabib, he folded like a cheap lawn chair. And you saw him in his last fight. He absolutely dominated. He's a warrior. But then just before Khabib retires, Gaethje folds like a lawn chair. You can't tell me that wasn't thrown. I mean, what's going on there?
Well, that's just it. If you look at the history of boxing, I mean, there are fixed fights for 100 years worth of fixed fights. I mean, that doesn't mean every fight is fixed, but it's happened all over the place. I mean, back in the 1920s, they actually artificially created a heavyweight champion. The organized crime did, because they fixed every one of his fights up until he became the champion. But I mean, if boxing can do it, why do people think UFC can't do it, or why it doesn't occur in mixed martial arts?
Right.
I mean, it's the exact same setup. It's the same type of organization that, to build up certain fighters, to make them look good, they will have their opponents throw fights. So that's why you can get a guy who's, 15-0 with 14 knockouts, because basically probably 14 of those fights were fixed.
Right.
And so they build him up, they get him, because he is talented. No, I'm not saying he's not talented, but you get him to that point, and then you get him a championship fight, and then maybe that fight is real. And then you see who's who. And then maybe if he's a really popular champ, I mean, I think like Ronda Rousey's entire career was fixed.
Yeah,
I think because she was just super popular. And when they basically, the UFC said, we don't need you anymore, they put her against, Cyborg or whoever it was.
Yeah, I can't remember
who got her head
kicked, like Nunes or something like that, one of them.
Yeah, but that was like the first legitimate fight Rousey had, and she got walloped.
Yep.
And then they got rid of her. See ya. Thanks. We all made our money. Bye.
And it's building up people like this new guy, Khamzat, his name is. I don't know how do you say his name, but his name is Khamzat. And this guy is coming in, and I think he's only taken like 1 or 2 punches in the past 4 fights. I mean, he's a warrior, but I think they're giving him some softer people, building him up. And that's what they could do. They can give you these guys, these gatekeepers. That's what those gatekeepers are for. You smash through them, you build this persona, he's untouchable, and then bam. He makes money. He's a big character, like Conor McGregor. Another guy they keep pumping, man. He can lose 20 times, but it's Conor McGregor, right? He can do no wrong. Yeah. Similar to Odell Beckham Jr. Done nothing for 5 years, but it's Odell Beckham Jr. Like, you got to let go of these guys. LeBron James, he's still good, but I can name 5 or 6 other players that are far superior to him in the NBA, but they keep pumping LeBron James. This is a guy that's got zero work ethic. And then you're going to be, well, Joe, how can LeBron have no work ethic? This is a guy that if he's down 15 points at the end of the game, will sit on the bench and watch, or he doesn't feel like playing, or, or cries at the end of the game, or, there's so many times where LeBron is folded just because his team, like, he didn't go down with the team. He just gave up. And that's the type of mentality. And I think Tim Grover wrote a book about this. He talks about how Kobe and Jordan had that mentality and LeBron didn't. You know what I mean? So,
but I mean, at the end of the day, why are those names, like you said, McGregor, Odell Beckham, LeBron, why those names get all these second chances? Money. That's what it boils down to. It's all about money. I mean, that's the thing. The NFL is a business. UFC is a business. What's going to make you the most money? What's going to make you the most profitable? That's what we need to happen. And like I say, more often than not, the ball seems to bounce the NFL's way. If they want, a certain team, or it seems like a certain team is being hyped up, more often than not, that's the team that winds up in the Super Bowl. That's the player who winds up scoring the game-winning basket. It doesn't matter. It seems like, where the money leads, where the money wants to go, that's where the results happen. I mean, it's I don't believe in coincidence that much, and I don't believe in coincidence when it's tied to a multi-billion-dollar business like the NFL. I just don't.
I'm looking at the Super Bowl winners. Like, what a great storyline. Like, again, like anything could be a good storyline, but Mahomes and like, Mahomes and Brady's a good story. Like, there's always like
Yeah.
a good
It's like
story.
heavyweight boxers coming together. And really, the NFL, the ratings are driven through quarterbacks. I mean, they've admitted this, that their ratings are tied to quarterback play. And I think now what's happening is you have all these old quarterbacks. You had this whole, Roethlisberger and Breeze and Brady, who should be done, but he's still going somehow, and Rivers. And you have all these guys, that whole like generation of quarterbacks are fading out. So the NFL now has to pump up this new generation of quarterbacks, and they have to find these new stars. They have to find Mahomes, and they have to find some of these younger guys, Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence. They're hoping these guys develop Baker Mayfield. And I think that's what they're working toward. And I think that's why you'll see younger quarterbacks do well, because they have to build up this new generation of quarterbacks, because they know that's where their bread's buttered and that's where they're going to make the money.
So the main reason, let's recap here. The main reason they're fixing games is for ratings. That's probably the main reason. It just makes the game more exciting. Creates controversy. At the end of the game, if we kind of screw one team, it'll create some drama on the field, the more people yelling. I mean, but that makes people frustrated, more or less, I would think. But again, if everything went smoothly, it'd be kind of boring, wouldn't it? There'd be so much certainty.
Well, and people, if people hated the controversy, if they hated all the bad calls the NFL officials are making, they'd stop watching. But they haven't stopped watching. So, it basically gives the NFL a green light to do what it wants to do. It'd be one thing if they made so many bad calls, people were so upset, people are talking about it all over the internet, and they turned off their TVs. That would be a development. I mean, and that's what happened after that, championship game between the Saints and Rams. When the Saints lost and the Rams went to the Super Bowl, nobody in New Orleans watched that Super Bowl. The ratings were like cut in half than they normally were for that city. So people did tune out there. But I mean, you don't get that across the board. You don't get that happening everywhere. So controversy sells. Bad PR is still PR, right? I mean, that's the whole story. So the NFL can get away with a lot of this. And again, it's entertainment. And I understand why people watch. It's a 3-hour distraction from your day. And, it's something that you can delve into and even, project yourself into. But you have to remember that it's a business. And it's a business tied to these media companies. And that's where all the money is generated.
So what does your book talk about? I honestly have not read the book. I got to get on it.
You should,
I should read it. How do you get the book, and where do you, what's the book about?
Well, like I say, I have 3 main books. I have The Fix is In, The Fix is Still In, and then Larceny Games. Larceny Games is based off all the FBI files I found. So it's more about the 60s and 70s and 80s and gambling, how games were fixed for that matter, and how much the FBI knew about all of this, and how much the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball denied about all of it. But The Fix is In and The Fix is Still In is more about this whole idea of games being manipulated by the leagues themselves for television ratings. And so I go through some games and I go through some history and some of the proof and things that I found of this, and just try to make my case as strong as I can, because there hasn't been a referee, there hasn't really been a player or a coach who's come out and said, yes, I fixed this game for the NFL. So yeah, it still winds up being a conspiracy theory by definition, I guess. But I think if you put enough of these things together and connect all the dots, you'll see that games are being manipulated and the leagues are involved, and they're doing it because of media.
And is there any other shows that you've been on to talk about this? Like any big shows, any networks? Like who have you talked to about this over there?
Probably the biggest one was I was on the Dan Patrick Show a few years back, but not about that specifically. It was more about sports gambling, and I kind of was able to turn the tide of the interview and get him to talk about this game fixing from a gambling aspect. But yeah, I mean, I've been on, like, actually probably my biggest one was Coast to Coast AM, but that's not a sports show. That's more of a conspiracy type of show. But it's like one of the bigger shows in the nation, late at night radio shows.
So are you able to, as a person that bets on it, do you have an edge knowing that the games are fixed and kind of see how they go? Like that guy Vegas Dave, do you think he has an edge knowing this stuff?
Well, I have heard from sports gamblers who definitely involve this when they're making picks, that they do think about the media and they do think about how the NFL may want certain games to go. I mean, they don't discount it at all. They don't see it as being a conspiracy theory. They think it's true. How true, that's up to them. But I think, they've seen that, again, the ball always seems to bounce the NFL's way. When they want certain teams to win, those are the teams that win. So if you take that into account with all the other things, I think it does give you an edge. And I mean, the point spread still, like you say, is hard to beat because they are really accurate at setting those things. But again, every edge matters in gambling, and I think it matters, like you say, out in the field. You give couple penalties to this team as opposed to that team, you can push a game a certain way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate it, Brian. We just answered a lot of questions here. And again, whatever a game is thrown or there's a bad play or something, people jump on it. This game is fixed now. Before it was more of a conspiracy theory. I think more people are now starting to catch on that something's going on that doesn't seem right. WWE style now.
Well, I think that's it. I think if you, like I say, you have to take your fan cap off. You have to stop being a fan and you have to look at it rationally. And that's hard for a lot of fans to do because they want it to be, it is entertainment. Like I say, it is a great distraction. It is all of those things. But if you look at it more logically, think of it, this is a major business. What was the best business decision? The best business decision is to have Peyton Manning win the Super Bowl because that's going to sell more t-shirts. That's going to draw more attention. That's going to be more of a thing we can celebrate for a long time. And Cam Newton winning the Super Bowl, what does that really do for us?
He's a young guy. He's got another chance down the road,
So, I mean, that's what I think it boils down to. And again, if you take that fan hat off and look at it more logically, more cynically even, then you'll start seeing these things jump out at you.
Wasn't there a time in wrestling as well where people thought wrestling was real, or were there this whole thing, you can't say wrestling's fake, blah, 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 and then now we all know it's fake? I wonder if there'll be a time where, we kind of accept that maybe that this is rigged, that it'll be a common household thing, but I don't know if it'll get to that.
Well, I don't think it would stop people from watching either. No. That's the thing. Is because, like I say, you don't know the outcome. I mean, it's same with professional wrestling. You really don't know which wrestler is going to win.
No.
So you still watch to see how it turns out.
Yes.
And I mean, it's like, watching some superhero thing. Superman's going to win. So why do you go to the movie? Because Superman's going to win. Well, you still go to it because you want to see how it turns out, how he wins. Yes. And it's the same with, the NFL and these things. If it is fixed, you don't know how it's going to turn out or how it's going to ultimately end. So you'll sit there and watch it just because.
Yeah, and just to finish off, do you think my uncle was right with the hockey thing? It is kind of weird how, I don't know, has there ever been, I don't think there's ever been two Canadian hockey teams, unless like way before.
So I was going to say, you're talking the 60s maybe.
I'm talking recently in the last 20, 30 years, like two Canadian teams. And why?
There's been a Canadian team in the NHL finals.
But there hasn't, not really, no, but imagine.
No, not like 20 some odd years.
But if you had two Canadian teams, you'd lose the U.S. audience. They would never want that.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's totally true. I mean, there's a book from 70, 71. I have the book and they eliminated the chapter in the second edition, which is really interesting. But in the first edition of the book, there's a chapter with 3 former NHL referees who, this is again, you're talking 50s, 60s, but who literally said in the book, interviewed in the book, said the NHL told us basically to make sure that certain penalties were called, certain teams won, certain teams lost. I mean, they literally admitted in the book that they were fixing games.
Wow.
At the NHL's behest. And that was back 50 years ago. So, I mean, what do you think has changed? I mean, look at how the Golden Knights suddenly made, an expansion team made it to the NHL finals. Wasn't that bizarre? And then that one year they got screwed on that 5-minute major penalty that I think gave the Sharks, they scored like 3 or 4 goals in those 5 minutes to win the game. I mean, I still think NHL games they can be influenced just as easily too.
And the last question, I guess, really, why should we as fans care if it's fixed? Aside from like we're betting and it goes one way or another, like, does it really matter? Maybe we bet on a team and that fix actually favors us. Why do we care if it's fixed, really?
Well, you don't have to care at all. I mean, to be honest, you really don't. I mean, because again, it's what I try to point, people to is it's entertainment. And if you're entertained by it, be entertained by it. I don't care. Watch it. Enjoy it.
It doesn't affect us really, does it?
No. And second of all, remember, it's a business. And it's a big multi-billion-dollar business, and it's connected to all the major media outlets at the same time. The NFL is funded by 5 different major media outlets, basically all of them that exist, and they're funded by them. So again, you're not going to get investigative journalism out of any of them because they're funding this league. So I just want fans to be more informed and understand what it is you're consuming, what it is you're putting your passion and your energy and your money into, because it may not be legitimate. And I mean, you look around the world, unfortunately, and you see corruption in government, you see it in, politics, sure. You see it in, even in the church. And yet amazingly, sports fans think there's no corruption in sports. And I have no idea how that exists. Why do you think it's pure? Why do you think sports are pure? Why do you think just because the league is conducting, drug testing, that therefore nobody in the NFL is taking performance enhancing drugs? You really believe that? You really believe Major League Baseball got steroids completely out of the game? You really believe that? There's corruption everywhere in sports. Just nobody's looking for it, and nobody will make it public knowledge. So just, for fans, wise up and understand what it is you're consuming and what it's, what your money's going toward.
Yeah. Well, Brian, stay on for a second after we finish this. But yeah, Brian, check out his books. I've linked them below here on YouTube. It was a fun conversation. I've always wanted to talk to somebody about this that's kind of researched it, right? That's not just that's some of my friends that just have, no, it's not, man. No, you need to relax. I'm sure you get that all the time, right?
Oh yeah. And the best thing is I can, like, if you're an NFL fan and I talk trash about the NBA, and I said, the NBA's fixed, they fixed it for Jordan, they fixed it for Kobe, and they'll, guys will be like, oh yeah, totally. And then I go, well, but in the NFL, they fixed it for, Manning, or they fixed it for Rodgers, and they'll be like, whoa.
Yeah.
No. Because it's hitting you personally. And that's part of this whole thing is, again, that's why I say you got to take your fan hat off and look at it from a different angle, because when it does hit you personally, then it's much quicker to push back and deny it. But when it's something that you don't care about, and I'm saying there's corruption involved, then you'll be like, okay, cool, I get it. And so that's part of the whole argument too.
Well, going back to how it affects people, a lot of fans think that they own the team, and that's a problem. Yeah. Like, that's team.
Huge.
That's my team. I lost. Dude, you don't own that team. You are in the stands cheering for them. They're not your team. And it's so funny. And again, I'm passionate about sports too, but I never designate that's my team. I'm a Colt. I like the Colts. I've enjoyed them since Peyton Manning, but I don't sit there and say it's my team. And there's this intimate relationship that fans have with their teams, like they own them. And I guess that's where, this becomes an issue as well.
Well, that's the first chapter in my original book, The Fix Is In, is all about that.
Yeah.
It's all about how you have that identity, and you hear it. Fans call into sports radio and they'll say, we need to do this. We need to trade this guy. We need to, upgrade our quarterback or whatever. It's not we, because you're not, like you said, you're not on the team. It's they. They need to do this. They need to do that. But people just identify that way. And it's like I said, the first chapter of my book is about that, because what you got to get past that mental aspect of it to look at this in, the light I'm trying to portray.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Brian. I appreciate you coming on.
Problem.
Guys, make sure you get the book and subscribe to the channel. Thumbs up. Leave your comments below. Do you think the fix is in? I certainly do. So thanks, Brian. We appreciate you.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. We're out.